Hi and welcome to Alexander Technique London. My name's Adrian and the question we're going to be asking today is the Alexander Technique difficult? Now, there seems to be not an uncommon view that maybe the Alexander Technique is difficult and maybe it's a bit esoteric and it takes a long time. And I actually don't think the Alexander Technique is difficult. I think it's actually very simple, and that's where its value comes from. But it's true to say that it can take a few lessons. Now, it wouldn't be uncommon in the past for teachers to say, oh, you need at least 20 lessons. Well, who's to say how many lessons you actually need? You might actually get what you need from one lesson. I've certainly been in the situation where I've given someone one lesson and it brought to their attention the one habit they needed to prevent to stop pain. And it was really quite simple. In this case, it was the habit of always talking to people with their head forward. And that was it. Once you knew that, you found it quite easy, actually, just to stop doing that. Now, I would say we could refine that further and further and further for them, but he didn't need to. He got what he wanted. It was fine. Who's to know whether, if you go for piano lessons, no one says is piano hard, you just go through a process, but who's to say whether you want to play Rachmaninoff or chopsticks? It's down to the individual, and you can go down that path as long and as far as you like. It being seen to be a bit esoteric as well, I think is a bit unhelpful. I think actually it's very practical and pragmatic. I think because it involves our thinking and presence in functioning, that's deemed in some way esoteric, and I don't think it needs to be. There's nothing wrong with it being deemed esoteric as far as I'm concerned, but if it's off-putting for you, you don't have to think of it that way. I have a view that our functioning is very much a relationship with our environment. We don't have individual personal functioning. It's a relationship between ourselves and our environment. But I would also call being a relationship with our environment as well, that sort of unity of our self-environment. And that could be quite a nice place to explore oneself and one's behaviour and one's attitudes. And if you deem that to be esoteric, so be it. I also consider that to be somewhat practical. It's just being present in the moment to know, so you know what you're doing in the moment, so you can actually observe your own behaviour and adjust accordingly to the circumstances. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Alexander Technique is actually very, very simple, and it needs to be, because frankly, as human beings, we're rather complicated. And it's just not a useful system to put in place. A complicated system a complicated technique to deal with a complicated system or a complicated organism, ourselves. That just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't be useful. It would be impractical. So the Alexander Technique has to actually fundamentally be very simple. And in some cases, I seem to think, I go through phases, man, I'm not teaching anything here. I'm teaching nothing. Well, that's because we want a little bit of nothing, because we've got too much of other stuff getting in the way habitually, and we want to remove all that stuff. And then we've got the old joke, I teach nothing, you say thanks for nothing, and I will be extremely happy. So that simplicity is built into the Alexander Technique. Forgetting all our terminology, it's really a basis to make observations about ourselves. And to observe whether we're well supported or whether we're habitually behaving in certain ways that aren't helpful, that we're habitually overreacting, and to know even what an overreaction looks like, or what a reaction looks like. It doesn't have to be even an overreaction, just a reaction. The typical one we talk about in the Alexander Technique, that kind of starting point, if you like, our barometer, is the head-neck relationship. Just because the nature of the startle reflex, we can physically see that you've changed. You've gone from one way of thinking to another. And that's what we're interested in, the thinking, not so much the physicality. The physicality gives us outer clues of what's going on with our thinking. Because of psychophysicality, we use the physicality to sense what's going on in your thinking and in your nervous system. And if you can make an observation, you're halfway home. So can you make an observation? Can you have some idea of how to come out of the lack of support you have? And can you learn to say no to that stimulus? That's pretty much it. I mean, honestly, I would be happy just to call that the Alexander technique. You can forget all your terminology. Terminology isn't the Alexander technique. The terminology is there to try and get an idea across, but the idea ultimately is an experience. In some ways, no language is complete enough, and no jargon is complete enough to really describe human behaviour. So we've got a few terms to try and highlight some aspects of ourselves in our behaviour. And I do sort of think that some of our terms are really aspects of our own presence. So we have terms like inhibition, which basically means to be cool as a cucumber, non-reactive, because when we react, we tighten. So if you can be non-reactive, you won't tighten. If you're not tightening, hopefully you move more freely. Hopefully you'll be in less pain. But inhibition is just an aspect of our being, isn't it? It's an aspect of our ability to be present. Directing and directions. Again, I think that's an aspect of our behaviour, of being engaged with our environment, the realities of our environment, the realities of our structure within that environment. So we have this structure, we have a head that balances a certain way through our evolution. And we basically say, can we allow ourselves, and I actually sometimes prefer the word intention rather than direction. Can I have an intention to go with what's been offered anyway? And what is being offered? Well, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I'm obsessed with the nature of gravity and the fact that it's actually the ground coming up underneath us. So an up direction is being provided for us. So we just say, yeah, I'm going to go with that. I have an intention to go along with the help that gravity is providing me. And the fact that we've got space to move in. Space is a good direction because you can be directed in all directions and live in your space. So when you say, see a good performer on stage, and they can actually be a very, petite person, a small person, but still own the stage. They've got a sense of really owning their space. And we can do that in everyday life. It's a way to direct out into our environment in a way that animals probably do, just being involved in their environment. And all these things are just terminology to find a few useful aspects of that help our functioning and our coordination. And the simpler, the better, frankly. And you don't have to use Alexander terms. Otherwise, do they? I don't know if they all actually translate brilliantly into other languages. Does that mean you can't learn the Alexander technique in other languages? Of course not. It's because ultimately it's an experience. And you have an experience by going through some experiments, if you like. If you're with a teacher in person, they'll move you, they'll guide you into movement to show you can move more freely with a lack of attitude. So you're fairly carefree and easygoing in the movements. You're well directed and inhibited, but that's a quality of being, presence. And they may not actually say anything to you at all. It's possible to guide people in that style of teaching and not say a word and someone to feel really changed afterwards. I prefer not to teach that way because the complaint always comes back as how do I do that to myself? It then starts to feel a bit like therapy rather than education. But, you can use any language as long as it gets the point across. Something I remember being taught is often mirroring a student's own language. Because if they've had an experience and you can sense they're having a positive experience and they use certain words, well, they're attaching those words to that experience. The experience is all that matters. It doesn't matter that they feel inhibited or that they feel directed. Those words aren't important. So the language isn't what makes it. It's just the simplicity of being able to make a few simple observations and be able to stop and maybe reorganize. That's not exactly rocket science, is it? There's really not that much to it. But of course, we are complicated and habits are ingrained, so it takes time. So really what makes the Alexander technique hard, if anything, is just patience and not being self-judgmental with yourself. Those are the two things that we bring to it that make the Alexander hard. The fact that we're self-judgmental, that when we go wrong, we go, oh God, I've done it wrong. That's not helpful. If you can know you've gone wrong, you can do something about it. You can pause for a moment, readjust, go, okay, I'm glad I caught that. And just not having patience. I mean, it gets worse and worse every year. You know, the zeitgeist of culture, just faster and faster and faster, people wanting quicker and quicker results. But the Alexander technique needs patience, just like learning a language needs patience, just like learning a musical instrument needs patience. But there's an investment there, because every small increment of improvement you make is there for you for life. And ultimately, in some ways, we're not really learning the Alexander technique at all. We're using it as a filter or a lens to observe our own behavior. So really, we're just learning about ourselves. And I would say we're pretty much a bottomless pit of self-reflection. We can keep learning about ourselves forever. Want to be careful not to be a snake chasing its own tail there sometimes, I think, and let go of it all and just be present. But there is an element of self-reflection, learning about ourselves, and what's a life for if we're not going to learn about ourselves? Seems a bit of a waste not to do so. There's a well-known quote there, isn't it? The unexamined life is not worth living. And then I saw a joke somewhere that was, so the examined life is worth living? One would hope so. But anyway, that's my take on this, that the Alexander technique is fundamentally simple, but we're using it to deal with a complicated organism, ourselves. And a little bit of patience will take you a long way. So I do teach the Alexander technique online. If you'd be interested, I have a 6-week introductory course, or if you happen to be around London, I'm available here in person as well. Okay, take care. Bye.